The bullet tore through the wooden post 6 inches from Natalie Parker's head, and she didn't even flinch, because dying might be preferable to marrying Edmund Fairchild back in Boston. She kept her chin high as she stood in the dusty street of Winnemucca, Nevada, her travel-stained dress clinging to her legs in the summer heat of 1882, while 2 drunken cowboys settled their dispute with revolvers instead of words. The chaos suited her just fine because it meant nobody was asking questions about the young woman who had arrived on yesterday's stage with nothing but a worn carpetbag and desperation in her eyes. She had been running for 3 weeks now, ever since she overheard her father and Edmund discussing the wedding date like she was a piece of property to be transferred from one ledger to another. 22 years old, and her father had sold her future to secure a business merger, as if her dreams and hopes meant nothing at all. So she had taken the household money she had been saving from managing the servants, left a note that simply said she was sorry, and bought a ticket heading west on the first available train. Winnemucca was as far as her money had carried her, a rough mining and ranching town in the high desert of Nevada, where the summer sun bleached everything to shades of brown and gold. It wasn't much to look at, with its single main street lined with saloons, a general store, a boarding house, and a scattering of other establishments that seemed to lean against each other for support. But it was 3,000 miles from Boston, from her father's disapproving frown, from Edmund's cold hands and colder eyes. The shooting stopped as suddenly as it had started. One cowboy lay bleeding in the street, while the other stumbled into the nearest saloon, and life in Winnemucca continued as if nothing had happened. Natalie watched as several men dragged the wounded man toward what she assumed was the doctor's office, her stomach churning but her expression carefully neutral. She had to be strong now. There was no going back. "You look lost, miss." The voice came from behind her, rough but not unkind. Natalie turned to find herself looking up at a man who seemed carved from the same hard landscape that surrounded them. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders straining against a faded work shirt and dust coating his worn denim pants. His face was tanned and weathered despite appearing to be only in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at the collar, and eyes the color of the sagebrush that dotted the hills. A battered hat hung down his back by its cord, and his right hand rested casually on his hip, near the revolver that hung there. "I'm not lost," she said, lifting her chin another fraction. "I'm exactly where I intend to be." His mouth quirked in something that might have been amusement. "And where's that? Because if it's Winnemucca, you might want to reconsider. This isn't a town for fine ladies from back east." "How do you know I'm from back east?" "Your dress, your shoes, the way you talk, the way you're standing in the middle of the street like you expect someone to come along and move the dirt for you." He paused, his gaze sharpening. "And the fact that you didn't scream when those bullets started flying. Either you're very brave or very desperate, and I'm guessing it's the latter." Natalie felt her face flush. "I don't see how that's any of your concern, Mr. Nathaniel Stone. Nate to most folks. I work at the Double R Ranch about 5 miles out." He gestured vaguely toward the north. "And you're right, it isn't my concern. But I figure if you're planning to stay in Winnemucca, you'll need work, and I happen to know the boarding house is looking for help in the kitchen. I don't know how to cook." The admission came out before she could stop it, and she wanted to bite her tongue. She needed to appear capable, confident, not like some helpless girl who had never done a day's real work in her life. Nate's expression didn't change. "Can you clean, mend, do laundry?" Yes, that much was true. She had learned needlework as a girl, and while she had never done her own laundry, she had supervised enough servants to know the basic principles. "Then that's something. Come on, I'll introduce you to Mrs. Chen. She runs the boarding house and she's fair, which is more than you can say for most folks in this town." Natalie hesitated. She had been taught her entire life not to trust strangers, especially strange men in rough western towns. But what choice did she have? She had exactly $12 to her name and nowhere to go. "Why are you helping me?" Nate had already started walking and now paused to look back at her. "Maybe I like seeing someone try to outrun their past. Now are you coming or not?" She picked up her carpet bag and followed him down the street, her button-up boots sinking slightly in the loose dirt with each step. The boarding house was a two-story structure that had seen better days, with peeling white paint and a porch that sagged in the middle. But the windows were clean and curtains hung in each one, suggesting someone cared about the place despite its shabby exterior. Mrs. Chen was a tiny Chinese woman with steel gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that seemed to see right through Natalie's carefully constructed composure. She looked Natalie up and down with a frankness that would have been considered rude in Boston but here seemed merely practical. "She can work?" Mrs. Chen asked Nate, as if Natalie wasn't standing right there. "Says she can clean and mend." "Can she work hard? No complaining?" "Why don't you ask her?" Mrs. Chen's gaze shifted to Natalie. "Can you work hard? No complaining?" "Yes, madam." Natalie straightened her shoulders. "I'm not afraid of hard work." Mrs. Chen circled her slowly. "Soft hands, fancy dress, even dirty, you run away from something." It wasn't a question, but Natalie answered anyway. "Yes." "Husband?" "No, family." Mrs. Chen nodded as if this made perfect sense. "I pay room and board plus $3 a week. You work 6 days, dawn to dark. Sunday afternoon is yours. You steal from me or my boarders, I have you arrested. You bring trouble here, you leave. Understand?" "Yes, madam." "Good. You start tomorrow. Nate, show her the room." Nate led Natalie up a narrow staircase to the second floor and down a hallway to a small room at the back of the house. It contained a narrow bed, a washstand, a single chair, and hooks on the wall for hanging clothes. The window overlooked a small yard where laundry lines stretched between poles, and beyond that, the vast expanse of the Nevada desert. "It's not much," Nate said, setting her carpet bag on the bed. "It's mine," Natalie replied, and was surprised to feel tears pricking at her eyes. She turned away quickly, not wanting him to see. "You'll do fine here." His voice was gentle. "Mrs. Chen is tough but fair, like I said, and most of the boarders are ranch hands from the surrounding spreads. They'll respect you as long as you respect yourself. Thank you." She turned back to face him. "I don't know why you helped me, but thank you," Nate shrugged. "Maybe I just wanted to see if you'd take the help or if you were too proud." He moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. If anyone asks where you're from or why you're here, keep your answers short. Folks out here generally figure everyone's running from something and they respect privacy. But if you make up elaborate lies, they'll know, and then they'll start asking questions." After he left, Natalie sank down on the bed and let herself cry for the first time since leaving Boston. But the tears were as much from relief as from fear or sadness. She was 3,000 miles from Edmund Fairchild. She had a roof over her head and the promise of work. And for the first time in her life, she was making her own choices. The work at the boarding house was harder than anything Natalie had ever experienced. Mrs. Chen woke her before dawn each day with a sharp knock on the door, and the work didn't stop until well after dark. She scrubbed floors on her hands and knees until her back ached, washed mountains of sheets and clothing in huge tubs of water heated over a fire in the yard, mended torn shirts and pants by lamplight until her eyes burned. Her hands, so soft and white in Boston, became red and chapped, her nails broken and ragged. But there was a satisfaction in the work that surprised her. Each clean floor, each mended shirt, each line of laundry flapping in the hot desert wind was evidence of her own capability. She was supporting herself with her own labor, beholden to no one. The thought was intoxicating. She saw Nate Stone occasionally when he came into town for supplies or to visit the saloon. He always tipped his hat to her and asked how she was settling in, but he never pressed for details about her past or lingered longer than necessary. She appreciated that more than she could say. Most of the other men in town either ignored her completely or stared at her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. But Nate treated her like a person rather than a curiosity or a potential conquest. 3 weeks after she arrived in Winnemucca, everything changed. She was hanging laundry in the yard, her arms aching from wringing out heavy sheets, when she heard horses approaching fast. It wasn't unusual for riders to come tearing into town, but something about the urgency of these hoofbeats made her look up. 3 men on lathered horses pulled up in front of the boarding house, and her heart stopped when she recognized the lead rider. Edmund Fairchild dismounted with the fluid grace of someone who had been riding all his life, despite spending most of his time in Boston counting money in his father's bank. He was exactly as she remembered: tall, thin, with pale blonde hair and the kind of handsome face that looked sculpted from marble and just as cold. His suit was dusty from travel but still finer than anything else in Winnemucca, and his expression was set in the same look of patient disapproval he always wore. "Natalie." His voice carried across the yard. "Thank God we found you. Your father has been beside himself with worry." She stood frozen, a wet sheet hanging from her hands, water dripping onto her already soaked skirts. "How did you find me? Did you really think you could just disappear?" Edmund walked toward her, his 2 companions following. "Your father hired the Pinkerton Detective Agency. They traced you to the train station, then west. It took some time, but here we are." He looked around with obvious distaste. "Living in squalor and working like a common servant. This is exactly why women shouldn't be allowed to make their own decisions." The words broke through her paralysis. Natalie dropped the sheet back into the basket and straightened her shoulders. "I'm not going back with you, Edmund. Of course you are. Don't be ridiculous." He reached for her arm, but she stepped back. "I said no. I don't want to marry you. I don't want the life my father planned for me. I want to stay here." Edmund's face darkened. "You don't have a choice, Natalie. Your father has legal authority over you until you marry, and when you marry me, that authority transfers to me. Either you come willingly, or I'll have you declared incompetent and take you back by force." "That's not going to happen." The new voice came from behind Edmund, and Natalie's breath caught when she saw Nate Stone standing at the gate to the yard. He must have been passing by, but now he stood with his feet planted and his hand resting on his revolver. "The lady said she's not going with you." Edmund turned slowly, his lip curling. "This is none of your concern, cowboy. This is a private family matter." "Don't look like family to me. Looks like a man threatening a woman who's told him no." Nate's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "And that makes it my concern. She's my fiancée." "Is that true?" Nate looked at Natalie. "No," she said firmly. "My father arranged a marriage without my consent. I never agreed to it." "Then she's not your fiancée," Nate said to Edmund, "and you need to leave." Edmund's 2 companions moved forward, their hands moving toward their own weapons, but Nate didn't flinch. "I wouldn't recommend that. I'm a fair shot, and I've got friends in town who won't take kindly to Eastern men drawing on one of their own." It was a bluff, Natalie thought. Nate barely knew her, and she had no idea how well liked he was in Winnemucca, but Edmund seemed to buy it because he raised a hand to stop his men. "This isn't over, Natalie," Edmund said coldly. Your father has legal standing, and I'll go to the territorial marshal if I have to. You'll be coming back to Boston one way or another." After they left, riding back toward what Natalie assumed was the hotel, she found herself shaking so hard she had to sit down on the edge of the laundry tub. Nate crossed the yard and crouched down beside her. "You all right?" "He'll do it," she whispered. "He'll go to the marshal and he'll have the law on his side. Women have no legal standing out here, just like back east. My father can claim I'm hysterical or incompetent, and they'll hand me over like a runaway horse." "Maybe." Nate was quiet for a moment, then said slowly, "Unless you're not a single woman under her father's authority anymore." She looked at him sharply. "What do you mean? If you were married, your father would have no legal claim on you. Your husband would have authority, not your father." "I don't see how that helps. I'd just be trading one man's control for another." She laughed bitterly. "Besides, even if I wanted to marry someone else quickly, there's no one in Winnemucca who would marry a woman they barely know just to help her escape an arranged marriage." Nate stood up and held out his hand to help her to her feet. When she took it, he said quietly, "Then arrange one with me." Natalie stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What? Marry me?" "I'll go to the territorial marshal's office with you right now. We'll get a license, find someone to perform the ceremony. Once we're married, your father's claim is void. Edmund Fairchild will have to go back to Boston empty-handed." "That's insane. You don't even know me." "I know you're brave enough to run 3,000 miles to escape a life you didn't want. I know you're willing to work hard at a job that's beneath what you were raised to do rather than give up your freedom. I know you've got more courage in your little finger than most men I've met have in their whole bodies." He paused. "And I know what it's like to want something different than what other people planned for you. But marriage is forever. You can't just marry a stranger to help her out of a difficult situation. Why not? People get married for worse reasons. At least this way we're both going into it with our eyes open." He studied her face. "Look, I'm not asking you to love me or even like me much. I'm offering you a way to stay free. We get married. You keep your job here at the boarding house or come work at the Double R if you prefer. We don't even have to live together if you don't want to. But on paper you'll be married, and that means your father can't touch you." "What do you get out of it?" she had to ask. In her experience, men didn't do things without expecting something in return. Nate shrugged. "Company, maybe. Someone to talk to who's not another cowhand complaining about the same things every night. And maybe knowing I did something good instead of just drifting through life working other people's ranches until I'm too old to sit a horse." It was madness. Complete madness. She had run away from one arranged marriage only to walk straight into another. But as Natalie looked up at Nate Stone's weathered face and steady eyes, she realized this was fundamentally different. Edmund had been chosen for her by her father for business reasons, a transaction she had no say in. But this was her choice. Nate was offering her an escape route, not a prison. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "I want it clear that I'm not promising to be a real wife in every sense. I'll cook and clean if we share a home, but I'm not promising anything else until I'm ready." "Fair enough. I'm not asking for anything you're not willing to give. And if someday I want to leave, or if you want to end the arrangement, we figure out how to do that." Agreed. Natalie took a deep breath. She was about to make one of the biggest decisions of her life with less thought than she used to put into choosing a dress for a party. But Edmund would be going to the marshal soon, and once he did, her time would run out. "All right. Yes, I'll marry you." They walked to the territorial marshal's office together. Natalie still in her damp work dress with her hair falling out of its pins. Nate in his dusty work clothes and battered hat. The marshal, a grizzled man named Collins who looked like he had seen everything at least twice, barely blinked at their request for a marriage license. "You both of legal age." "I'm 22, Natalie said. "He's 25. Nate nodded confirmation. "Any legal impediments to marriage?" "Either of you already married, brother and sister? Anything like that?" "No, sir." Marshal Collins filled out the paperwork with painful slowness, then looked up at them. "You need someone to perform the ceremony. Judge Henderson is making his circuit and won't be back for 2 weeks. "I can do it, though, if you're in a hurry." "We're in a hurry," Nate said. "Figured as much. You're not the first couple to come in here looking to tie the knot fast." Collins stood up and came around his desk. "All right, then. Join hands." Natalie reached out and Nate took her hand in his. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip steady. The whole thing felt surreal, like she was watching it happen to someone else. Marshal Collins pulled out a worn book and flipped through it until he found the page he wanted. "Do you, Nathaniel Stone, take this woman, Natalie Parker, to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do." Nate's voice was calm and sure. "Do you, Natalie Parker, take this man, Nathaniel Stone, to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" This was it. Her last chance to back out. Natalie looked up at Nate and saw nothing but patience in his eyes. He would let her walk away right now if she wanted to. But Edmund was out there, and her father's money could buy a lot of influence even in Nevada. This might be her only chance. "I do." "Then by the authority vested in me by the territory of Nevada, I pronounce you husband and wife. You can kiss if you want, but it's not required." They didn't kiss. Nate just squeezed her hand once gently and then released it. They signed the marriage certificate. Marshal Collins signed as witness, and just like that, Natalie Parker became Natalie Stone. As they walked out of the marshal's office, Natalie felt lightheaded. She was married. To a man she had spoken to maybe a dozen times. A man she barely knew at all. "What had she done? You all right?" Nate asked as they stood in the street. "I don't know. Ask me again in a few hours." She pressed a hand to her forehead. "What happens now? Now I go back to the Double R and explain to my boss why I just got married in the middle of a workday. You go back to the boarding house and finish the laundry. And when Edmund Fairchild comes looking for you again, you tell him you're a married woman and he needs to leave you alone. Just like that. Just like that." Nate adjusted his hat. "Look, I know this is strange and fast and not how either of us probably thought we'd get married, but you're safe now. That's what matters." Edmund came back 3 hours later, and this time he had a lawyer with him. Natalie was in the kitchen helping Mrs. Chen prepare dinner when Mrs. Chen came to tell her there were men in the front parlor demanding to see her. "You want me to send them away?" Mrs. Chen asked, her small face set in fierce lines. "No, I'll talk to them, but thank you." Natalie wiped her hands on her apron and went to face her former fiancé. Edmund stood in the small parlor with his arms crossed and his expression triumphant. "I've spoken to the territorial marshal and to my lawyer here, and the law is very clear. Your father has legal authority over you, and you will be returning to Boston with me." "I'm afraid that's not possible," Natalie said, surprised by how steady her voice was. "I'm married now. You can check with Marshal Collins if you don't believe me." The color drained from Edmund's face. "You're lying." "I'm not. I married Nathaniel Stone this afternoon. I'm Natalie Stone now, not Natalie Parker, and my father has no legal claim on me anymore." The lawyer, a thin man with spectacles, frowned. "Is this true? You're actually married?" "Yes, I have the certificate if you'd like to see it." Edmund's face went from white to red. "You married some cowboy you barely know just to spite me, just to get out of your obligations to your family. I married a good man who offered me a choice, Natalie corrected. Something you and my father never did. This is insane. You'll regret this, Natalie. You'll spend the rest of your life stuck in this God-forsaken desert with some ranch hand while you could have had everything in Boston. Wealth, status, respect. I'd rather have my freedom. She met his eyes steadily. Go home, Edmund. Tell my father I'm sorry I couldn't be the obedient daughter he wanted, but I'm not sorry for the choice I made. I'm happy here. It wasn't entirely true. She wasn't sure yet if she was happy, but she was definitely not unhappy, and that was something. After Edmund and his lawyer left, their threats hanging empty in the air, Natalie went back to the kitchen and found her hands were shaking again. Mrs. Chen poured her a cup of tea and sat down across from her. You marry Nate Stone? Yes. Good man, quiet but good. Mrs. Chen nodded approvingly. You could do worse. I barely know him. You learn. Marriage is long, plenty of time to know someone. Mrs. Chen patted her hand. You still work here if you'll have me. Nate said I could decide what I wanted to do. Good, you good worker. Would be sorry to lose you. Mrs. Chen stood up. But married now. You should live with husband, not in boarding house. Not right for married couple to live separate unless they fighting. Natalie hadn't thought that far ahead. Where would they live? Nate had said something about the Double R Ranch, but did he have his own place? Did ranch hands even have their own homes, or did they live in a bunkhouse with the other workers? The question was answered later that evening when Nate returned to the boarding house and asked if they could talk. Mrs. Chen gave them the use of the small sitting room off the kitchen, and Natalie sat on the edge of a chair while Nate stood by the window, his hat in his hands. I talked to my boss, Henry Roberts. He owns the Double R, Nate said. I told him what happened and he said congratulations. He wasn't upset that you got married without warning. Henry's not like that. He's good people. Nate turned the hat in his hands. Anyway, I've been living in the bunkhouse with the other hands, but that's not suitable now. Henry said there's a small cabin on the far edge of the property that needs some repairs, but if I'm willing to fix it up, we can live there. It's not much, but it would be ours. You want me to come live with you? Natalie tried to keep the panic out of her voice. Only if you want to. I meant what I said before about not expecting anything from you that you're not ready to give. The cabin has 2 rooms. We could hang a curtain or something for privacy. But Mrs. Chen is right that it would look strange for a married couple to live separately, and it might make people ask questions we don't want to answer. He was right. Natalie knew. If she wanted to maintain the fiction that this was a real marriage, they needed to at least appear to live together. And she supposed she owed Nate that much after he had married her to save her from Edmund. All right, she said finally. I'll come to the ranch, but I want to keep working at the boarding house if Mrs. Chen will let me come in a few days a week. I need to earn my own money. You don't trust me to provide for you. It's not about trust. It's about not being dependent on anyone. Nate studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I can understand that. We'll make it work. They moved out to the cabin 3 days later. Nate borrowed a wagon from the ranch and came to collect Natalie and her few belongings. The ride out to the Double R took almost an hour, following a rutted road through sagebrush and scattered juniper trees. The land was harsh and beautiful in a way Natalie had never experienced. All wide skies and distant mountains, and a silence so complete it made her ears ring. The Double R Ranch was bigger than she had expected, with a main house, several barns, corrals full of horses and cattle, and a cluster of smaller buildings including the bunkhouse where Nate had been living. Their cabin was about a quarter-mile from the main cluster, tucked into a small hollow with a scraggly cottonwood tree providing a bit of shade. Nate hadn't exaggerated when he said it needed repairs. The roof leaked in 2 places, the door hung crooked on its hinges, and the windows were so dirty they barely let in light. But the stone fireplace looked solid and the floors, though dusty, were intact. "I know it's not much," Nate said, setting her carpet bag down inside. "But I'll fix it up. Make it comfortable. It's fine." Natalie looked around what would be her new home. The main room held a small table with 2 chairs, a battered armchair near the fireplace, and not much else. Through an open doorway she could see the second room, which contained only a rope bed with a thin mattress. "You said there were 2 rooms. I'm going to section off part of the main room for my sleeping area," Nate explained. "The bedroom is yours. I wouldn't feel right making you sleep out here." Over the next few weeks, Natalie settled into a routine that was completely different from anything she had known in Boston. She woke before dawn, made breakfast for herself and Nate, then spent the day cleaning and repairing the cabin while Nate worked on the ranch. 3 days a week, she rode into town on the gentle mare Nate borrowed for her use and worked at the boarding house, returning before dark. The other days she spent making their cabin into something resembling a home. It was hard work, but satisfying. She scrubbed the floors until they gleamed, washed the windows, patched the holes in the roof using materials Nate showed her how to work with. She sewed curtains from fabric she bought with her earnings from Mrs. Chen, made cushions for the hard chairs, even managed to cook simple meals that were at least edible if not exactly delicious. And slowly, carefully, she and Nate began to know each other. They talked in the evenings after dinner when they were both too tired to do much else. Nate told her about growing up in Missouri, the youngest son of a farmer who had too many children and too little land. He had headed west at 18, looking for something more than a life bent over a plow in someone else's field. He had worked ranches in Kansas, Colorado, and now Nevada, learning everything he could about horses and cattle. "Why Nevada?" Natalie asked one evening as they sat outside watching the sun set over the distant mountains. "I like the openness of it, the way you can see for miles in every direction." Nate leaned back in his chair, his long legs stretched out in front of him. Back in Missouri, everything was closed in. Trees and hills and people always watching what you did. Out here you can breathe. Natalie understood that more than she could say. She told him a little about Boston, about the endless social obligations and rigid rules that governed every aspect of life. She told him about her father, a successful merchant who had built his business from nothing and expected his only daughter to help him reach even greater heights through an advantageous marriage. "Did you love him?" Nate asked. "Your father, I mean." "I don't know. I think I loved the idea of him, the father I wanted him to be. But the real man," she shook her head. "He only saw me as a tool to be used. I don't think he ever cared about what I wanted or who I was. I'm sorry. Don't be. Coming here, marrying you, it was the best thing I could have done. I'm free now." But freedom, she was learning, came with its own challenges. There were times when the loneliness of the cabin pressed in on her, when she missed the constant activity and conversation of Boston. There were times when she looked at Nate and wondered who he really was beneath the quiet exterior, what he thought about their strange arrangement, whether he ever regretted helping her. They had been married for 6 weeks when everything shifted between them. It started with a rattlesnake. Natalie had been hanging laundry outside the cabin when she heard the distinctive rattle and looked down to see the snake coiled near her feet. She froze, her heart hammering, remembering Nate's warnings about the dangers of the desert. The snake was huge, as thick as her wrist, and its triangular head was raised as it prepared to strike. The gunshot was deafening. The snake's head exploded and its body writhed in the dirt. Natalie stumbled backward and found Nate right behind her, his revolver still raised. "You all right?" He grabbed her arm to steady her. "Yes, thank you. I didn't hear it until it was right there." They can be quiet when they want to be. Nate used a stick to pick up the dead snake and toss it far from the cabin. "You need to be more careful. Always watch where you're stepping out here." "I will." Natalie was shaking now that the danger had passed. "I'm sorry. I should have been paying attention. Hey." Nate holstered his gun and turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "It's all right. You're safe. That's what matters." And then somehow his hands were no longer on her shoulders but cupping her face, and he was looking down at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. And she was rising up on her toes without quite meaning to. And then they were kissing. It was nothing like the chaste, cold kisses Edmund had given her during their brief courtship. This was heat and urgency and something that made her whole body come alive. Nate's lips were warm and slightly chapped, and he tasted like coffee and the dust of the desert. His hands were gentle but firm, holding her like she was something precious, and when she made a small sound in the back of her throat, he deepened the kiss until she forgot how to breathe. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. Nate's eyes were dark and intense, and Natalie could feel her cheeks burning. "I'm sorry," he said roughly. "I shouldn't have done that. You said you weren't ready for anything like that, and I had no right." "I kissed you back," Natalie pointed out, her voice shaky. "Still, I'm your husband and I'm supposed to protect you, not take advantage." "You didn't take advantage. I wanted you to kiss me." The admission surprised her, but it was true. She had been thinking about what it might be like to kiss Nate for weeks now, watching the way he moved, the way his hands looked when he worked, the rare smile that transformed his serious face. Nate searched her face. "What are we doing here, Natalie?" "I don't know. But maybe we could figure it out together." Something in his expression softened. "Yeah, maybe we could." That night, for the first time since they had married, Nate didn't sleep in his makeshift area in the main room. He came to bed with Natalie, and they lay together in the darkness, holding each other carefully like they were both afraid the other might break. They didn't do anything more than kiss and touch and whisper in the dark, but it felt like crossing an important threshold. "Tell me about your dreams," Natalie said, her head resting on Nate's chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart. "My dreams?" He sounded surprised by the question. "What do you want out of life? Surely you don't plan to work as a ranch hand forever." Nate was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, "I want my own land someday. Not a huge spread, just enough for a decent herd and a good house. I've been saving my wages for years, and I'm almost there. Another year or two and I'll have enough to make a down payment on a place." "Where?" "Somewhere around here, I think. I like Nevada. It's hard country but honest. If you work hard, you can make something of yourself without needing the right family name or connections." Natalie thought about that. She had spent her whole life in a world where family name and connections were everything, where what you knew mattered far less than who you knew. The idea of a place where hard work and determination were enough was almost foreign to her. "What about you?" Nate asked. "What do you dream about?" "I don't know anymore. All my old dreams were about escaping, and I've done that. Now I need to figure out what comes next." She paused, then added quietly, "But I think maybe I'd like to have a real home someday. Not just a cabin we're fixing up, but a place that's truly ours. With a garden, maybe. And children, if that's in the cards." She felt Nate's chest hitch beneath her cheek. "Children? Is that so surprising? I know this marriage started as a practical arrangement, but if we're going to be together anyway, and if we care about each other, then why not build a real life?" "Do you care about me?" His voice was carefully neutral. Natalie lifted her head to look at him in the darkness. She could barely make out his features, but she could feel the tension in his body. "Yes, I didn't expect to, but I do." You're a good man, Nate Stone, maybe the best man I've ever known. He pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair. I care about you too, more than I probably should, considering we got married to save you from another man. That's not why we're married anymore, though, is it? No, no, it's not. They made love for the first time that night, slow and careful, learning each other's bodies in the darkness. Afterward, as Natalie lay in Nate's arms feeling utterly transformed, she realized that what had started as a marriage of convenience was becoming something real. Summer faded into fall and fall into winter. The high desert grew cold at night, and snow dusted the distant mountains. Natalie continued working at the boarding house, but now she went home each evening to a cabin that felt like more than just a shelter. She went home to a husband who smiled when he saw her, who kissed her hello and goodbye, who sat with her in the evenings and talked about their days. Henry Roberts, Nate's boss, invited them to dinner at the main house one Sunday. He was a stocky man in his 50s with a weathered face and shrewd eyes. His wife Rachel was a plump woman with graying hair and a warm smile who immediately put Natalie at ease. "Nate's been with us for 3 years now," Henry said over dinner. "Best hand I've ever had. Patient with the horses, never complains, works harder than men twice his size." "He's a good man," Natalie agreed, and felt a flush of pride when Nate's hand found hers under the table and squeezed. "We were surprised when he got married so sudden," Rachel said, passing around a bowl of potatoes. "But we're glad. He seemed lonely before, even though he never said so." After dinner, as the men talked about ranch business, Rachel drew Natalie aside. "I hope you don't mind me being direct, but are you happy out here? It's a hard life for someone raised in the city." "It is hard," Natalie admitted, "but I'm happier than I ever was in Boston. Out here, I'm living my own life instead of the one someone else planned for me." Rachel studied her shrewdly. "You love him." It wasn't a question, but Natalie answered anyway. "Yes, I didn't plan to, but yes." "Does he know?" "I think so. We haven't said the words yet, but I think we both know." "Don't wait too long to say it," Rachel advised. "Life out here is uncertain. You never know what might happen. Best to make sure people know they're loved while you have the chance." That night, as they rode back to the cabin under a sky full of stars, Natalie thought about Rachel's words. She had been afraid to say the words out loud, as if speaking them might somehow break the spell and send everything crashing down. But maybe that was just fear talking. Maybe it was time to be brave again. "Nate," she said as they approached the cabin. "Yeah, I love you." He pulled the horse to a stop and turned to look at her. In the moonlight, she could see his expression transform from surprise to something that looked like wonder. "Say that again." "I love you. I know this whole thing started as a way to help me escape Edmund, but somewhere along the way, it became real for me. You're real to me, and I love you." Nate climbed down from the horse and reached up to lift her down. Then he kissed her with a thoroughness that left no doubt about his feelings. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were bright. "I love you too," he said. "I think I started falling for you that first day, when you stood in the street watching those cowboys shoot at each other and didn't even flinch. You were the bravest, most stubborn woman I'd ever seen, and I knew I wanted to know you better. So you married me." Natalie laughed, and it came out a little teary. "Best decision I ever made." He kissed her again. "Come on, let's go home." Home. Such a simple word, but it meant everything. Winter deepened, and life settled into a rhythm. Natalie cut back her hours at the boarding house because the ride into town was difficult in the cold weather, and she spent more time at the ranch, helping Rachel with various tasks and learning about ranch life. She learned to ride better, to identify different types of cattle, even to help with basic veterinary care when one of the horses came up lame. She also learned that she was pregnant. It was Rachel who first suggested it, when Natalie mentioned feeling tired and queasy in the mornings. "How long since your last monthly?" Natalie had to think about it, then felt her eyes widen. 6 weeks, maybe 7. "Thought so, you've got the look about you." Rachel smiled. "Congratulations." Natalie didn't know what to feel. Fear, excitement, joy, terror, they all swirled together until she felt dizzy. A baby. She was going to have a baby. She and Nate were going to be parents. She told him that night over dinner. He had just taken a bite of stew when she blurted it out. "I'm pregnant." Nate choked, coughed, and took a long drink of water. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor, but yes, I think so." He stared at her for a long moment, then a slow smile spread across his face. "We're going to have a baby." "Yes, are you happy about it?" "Happy." He stood up and came around the table to pull her into his arms. "Natalie, I'm over the moon. I know we haven't talked much about children, but yes, I'm happy. I'm terrified, but I'm happy." "Me too. Terrified and happy seems to be my natural state lately." They rode into town the next day to see the doctor, who confirmed what Rachel had already guessed. The baby would come in late summer, around August. Natalie was healthy, the doctor said, and should have no trouble with the pregnancy as long as she took care of herself. As they left the doctor's office, Natalie's thoughts were already racing ahead. They would need more space in the cabin. They would need baby clothes and blankets and a cradle. She would need to figure out how to be a mother, something her own mother had died when Natalie was too young to remember. "Hey," Nate touched her arm. "What's wrong? You look worried." "I don't know how to be a mother. I never had one to learn from. You'll figure it out. You're smart and capable and you'll love our child. That's what matters." He paused. "Besides, Rachel will help and Mrs. Chen. You've got people here now, Natalie. You're not alone." He was right. She wasn't alone anymore. She had Nate and friends and a community. And she had herself, stronger and more capable than she had ever given herself credit for. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the cold months of winter and into the warming days of spring. Natalie's body changed, growing round with the child inside her, and she was constantly amazed by the reality of it. There was a new life growing inside her, a person who would be part her and part Nate, a whole new beginning. Nate was endlessly careful with her, insisting she not work too hard, making sure she ate enough, worrying over every twinge and pain. It was sweet, but sometimes overwhelming. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she told him one day when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "Women have been doing this for thousands of years. I can hang some sheets. I know, I just want to make sure you're all right." "I am all right, better than all right. I'm happy, Nate. Truly happy for maybe the first time in my life." In May, a letter arrived from Boston. Natalie stared at her father's handwriting on the envelope for a long time before she could bring herself to open it. When she finally did, the contents were brief and cold. "Natalie, I have been informed of your marriage and current situation. While I cannot approve of your choices, I recognize that you are legally beyond my authority now. Your mother's jewelry, which was to have been your dowry, will be sent to you. I wish you well in your new life. Your father." That was all. No expressions of love, no forgiveness, no invitation to ever come home. Just a cold acknowledgement that she existed and a promise to send her mother's jewelry. Natalie found herself crying even though she had expected nothing more. Nate held her while she cried. "I'm sorry. I know it hurts, even when you're not surprised by it. I just wish he could have said he loved me, once, just once." She wiped her eyes. "But I suppose some people just aren't capable of it." "His loss," Nate said firmly. "You're the most amazing person I know, and if he can't see that, he's a fool." The jewelry arrived a month later, a small box containing her mother's pearls, several rings, and a delicate gold locket. Natalie opened the locket and found a tiny portrait inside, a young woman with dark hair and kind eyes. Her mother, who she couldn't remember but who had loved her enough to leave her these treasures. "She's beautiful," Nate said, looking over her shoulder. "You look like her." "Do I?" Natalie studied the portrait. Maybe there was a resemblance around the eyes and mouth. "I wish I could have known her." "You can tell our child about her. Keep her memory alive." Our child. The words still sent a thrill through Natalie every time she heard them. She put the locket around her neck and decided she would wear it always. A connection to the mother she had never known, and a reminder that love could transcend even death. Summer arrived with its blazing heat. Natalie grew increasingly uncomfortable as the baby grew larger, and there were days when she thought she might melt in the desert sun. But she also felt an increasing sense of excitement and anticipation. Soon, very soon, she would hold her child in her arms. The baby came in the middle of August, on a day so hot it seemed like the air itself was on fire. The labor was long and painful, and there were moments when Natalie was certain she couldn't bear another minute. But Rachel was there, coaching her through it, and Nate held her hand and whispered encouragement, and finally, the baby was born. "It's a boy," Rachel announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A beautiful, healthy boy. A son." Natalie felt tears streaming down her face as Rachel placed the baby in her arms. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and Nate's eyes and a pair of lungs that suggested he would make his opinions known from the very start. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I'm your mama." Nate leaned over them both, his eyes wet. "He's perfect. You're perfect. I can't believe he's ours." "What should we name him?" Natalie asked. They had discussed names but never settled on anything. Now, looking at their son, one name came to Natalie's mind. "What about Nathan?" "For you, but his own name too." "Nathan Stone," Nate said slowly. "I like it. Nathan James Stone, maybe. James was my grandfather's name." "Nathan James Stone," Natalie repeated. "Welcome to the world, Nathan." The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feeding, and learning how to care for an infant. It was exhausting and overwhelming and absolutely wonderful. Natalie had never imagined she could love anyone as much as she loved the tiny person who depended on her for everything. Nate was a devoted father from the start, walking the floor with Nathan when he cried, changing diapers without complaint, singing off key lullabies that somehow always put the baby to sleep. Watching him with their son made Natalie fall in love with him all over again. Nathan was 6 months old when everything changed again. Henry Roberts called Nate into the main house one morning in early February. When Nate came back to the cabin, he looked stunned. "What's wrong?" Natalie asked immediately. Baby Nathan balanced on her hip. "Nothing's wrong." The opposite, actually. Nate sank into a chair and ran his hands through his hair. "Henry wants to sell me 20 acres on the south end of the ranch. Says he's getting older and doesn't need all this land anymore, and he'd rather sell it to someone he knows will take care of it. He's offering it to me for less than half what it's worth." Natalie's heart leaped. 20 acres, Nate, that's enough for a good start." "I know. With the money I've saved and what he's asking, I can do it. We could build a real house, start our own herd." He looked up at her with wonder in his eyes. "We could have our own ranch, Natalie, our own land. Then we have to do it." She shifted Nathan to her other hip. "This is what you've been working toward all these years." "What we've been working toward," Nate corrected. "Everything I do, it's for us now. For you and Nathan and any other children we might have." They spent the next few months planning and preparing. Nate worked extra hours to save every penny he could, and Natalie went back to working at the boarding house part-time, taking Nathan with her. Mrs. Chen was delighted to have a baby around and often watched Nathan while Natalie worked. In April, they signed the papers that made them landowners. 20 acres of high desert land with a creek running through it, and a view of the mountains that took Natalie's breath away. It wasn't much by the standards of the big ranchers, but it was theirs. They spent that summer building their house, a simple structure but solid and well-made. Henry and the other ranch hands helped during their off hours, and slowly the walls went up, the roof went on, the windows and doors were hung. By September it was finished. A 4-room house with a proper bedroom, a separate room for Nathan, a kitchen and a parlor. It even had a real floor instead of packed dirt and glass windows instead of oiled paper. The day they moved in, Natalie stood in the middle of the parlor and cried. "It's ours, really and truly ours." "Ours," Nate agreed, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Home." They slowly built up their herd, starting with a dozen cattle and adding more as they could afford them. It was hard work, harder than anything Natalie had ever imagined, but also deeply satisfying. She learned to help with the cattle, to ride out and check the fences, to assist with branding and all the other tasks that came with ranching. Her hands, which had once been soft and useless, were now calloused and strong. Nathan grew from a baby into a toddler, then into a boy who could walk and talk and had an endless curiosity about everything around him. He looked like Nate, with the same dark hair and steady eyes, but he had Natalie's stubborn determination. By the time he was 3, he was insisting on helping with everything, even when his help consisted mostly of getting in the way. Natalie became pregnant again when Nathan was 4. This time she knew what to expect, and the pregnancy seemed easier somehow. Or maybe she was just more confident, more certain of herself and her ability to handle whatever came. Their second son, Andrew Thomas Stone, was born in the spring of 1888, and Nathan was fascinated by his baby brother. "He's so small," Nathan whispered, staring at Andrew with wide eyes. "Was I that small?" "You were exactly that small," Natalie assured him. "And now you're a big brother, which means you have an important job helping take care of him." Life settled into a new rhythm. The ranch slowly prospered, not making them rich but providing enough for them to live comfortably. They added a barn and a chicken coop and a small corral. Natalie started a garden, coaxing vegetables out of the desert soil. It wasn't the life she had been raised for in Boston, but it was a good life. She thought about Edmund sometimes, and her father, and the life she had left behind. She wondered if Edmund had ever married someone else, if her father had found another way to make his business connections. But those thoughts came less and less frequently as the years passed, because this life, this present moment with Nate and their children and their land, was so much more real and important than anything that had come before. One evening, when Nathan was 7 and Andrew was 3, the family sat outside watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and red. Nathan was practicing his letters with a primer that Rachel Roberts had given him, and Andrew was playing in the dirt with a collection of rocks he had deemed his treasures. Nate sat in his chair with his feet stretched out, and Natalie sat beside him, her hand in his. "You ever regret it?" Nate asked quietly. "Giving up your old life for this one?" Natalie thought about it, really thought about it. She thought about the grand houses of Boston, the fancy dresses, the social events, all the things she had left behind. Then she looked at her children, healthy and happy. She looked at the house they had built with their own hands, the land that was theirs, the life they had created together. "Not for a single second," she said. "This is real, Nate. That was just pretend. I was playing a role my father wrote for me, but I was never really alive until I came here. Until I met you. Best day of my life when you got off that stage," Nate said. "I took one look at you standing in that street with your chin up and your eyes blazing, and I thought, that woman is something special, and I was right. You saved me, you know." Not just from Edmund, but from myself. You showed me I could be more than what I was raised to be." "You saved yourself," Nate corrected. "You're the one who had the courage to run. I just gave you a safe place to land." Nathan looked up from his primer. "Papa, what are you and Mama talking about?" "How your mama is the bravest person I've ever met," Nate said. "And how lucky I am that she agreed to marry me." "Why wouldn't she marry you? You're the best papa in the whole world. I like to think so. But your mama could have married anyone, and she chose me." "Because you're the best," Nathan said with the absolute certainty of a child. "Right, Mama, right," Natalie agreed, squeezing Nate's hand. "The very best." As the stars came out one by one, filling the vast Nevada sky with light, Natalie thought about how far she had come. From a frightened girl fleeing an arranged marriage to a woman who knew her own strength. From an unhappy daughter to a devoted mother. From someone who was lost to someone who had finally found her way home. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. There were hard times when the cattle got sick, or the creek ran low, or the winter was particularly brutal. But there were also good times. Nathan learning to read and write, Andrew taking his first steps, both boys learning to ride almost as soon as they could walk. There were quiet evenings with Nate after the children were asleep, sitting together and talking about their dreams and plans. There were Sunday dinners with Henry and Rachel, who had become like family. There were moments of perfect contentment that Natalie knew she would remember forever. When Nathan was 10 and Andrew was 6, Natalie gave birth to their third child, a daughter they named Rose Elizabeth Stone. She had Natalie's dark hair and delicate features, but Nate's steady temperament. The boys adored their baby sister, and Nathan in particular seemed to think it was his personal responsibility to keep her safe from all harm. "She's so small, Mama," he said, echoing his words from years ago when Andrew was born. "What if something happens to her?" "Then we'll take care of her together," Natalie said. "That's what families do." Rose grew into a bright, curious child who followed her brothers everywhere and insisted on doing everything they did, even when it was too hard or too dangerous for someone her age. She was fearless in a way that sometimes terrified Natalie, climbing trees and chasing after cattle, and generally getting into whatever mischief she could find. "She reminds me of you," Nate said one day, watching Rose try to rope a fence post like she had seen Nathan doing. "Same stubborn determination." "I was never that wild as a child," Natalie protested. "Maybe not when you were 6, but I bet you would have been if you'd been allowed. You had that wildness in you when I met you. That's why you ran all the way to Nevada." Maybe he was right. Maybe the woman she had become had always been inside her, just waiting for the chance to break free. The ranch continued to prosper. They expanded their herd, added more land when they could afford it, built a bigger barn. Nate had become known as one of the best ranchers in the region, and people came from miles around to buy his cattle. Natalie managed the business side of things, keeping the books and handling the negotiations with buyers. Together, they made a formidable team. Nathan grew into a tall, serious young man who loved the land as much as his father did. Andrew was more adventurous, always talking about traveling and seeing more of the world. Rose was only 8, but already showing signs of being just as stubborn and determined as her mother. They were good children, happy and healthy, and Natalie was proud of each of them. One spring evening, when the children were all asleep and the house was quiet, Natalie and Nate sat on the porch watching the stars. It had become their ritual over the years, this quiet time together at the end of the day. "You remember the day we got married?" Natalie asked. "Of course. How could I forget? You were soaking wet from doing laundry and looked like you wanted to murder someone," she laughed. "I was terrified. I thought I was trading one trap for another, And did you trade one trap for another? No, you gave me freedom. You gave me a choice. That's the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. She turned to look at him. I love you, Nate Stone. I don't say it enough, but I do. I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone. I love you too. He pulled her close. Sometimes I still can't believe you're real, that all of this is real. I was just a ranch hand with no prospects, and now I have a wife I adore, 3 amazing children and land of my own. It's more than I ever dreamed possible. We built it together. We did. And we're not done yet. We've got years ahead of us still, years to watch our children grow up and maybe start families of their own. Years to make this ranch even better. Years to love each other. Natalie leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling completely content. Years and years, she agreed. The future stretched out before them, full of possibility and promise. There would be challenges, she knew. Life was never entirely smooth, especially out here in the high desert where nature was as harsh as it was beautiful. But they would face those challenges together, just as they had faced everything else. She thought sometimes about the girl she had been, standing in that dusty street in Winnemucca with nothing but a carpet bag and desperation. She had been so lost then, so afraid. And then Nate had appeared and offered her a choice, a way out, a chance at something different. Then arrange one with me, he had said, and with those simple words her whole life had changed. She had taken a leap of faith, marrying a stranger to escape an arranged marriage, and somehow that leap had carried her to exactly where she was supposed to be. She had found love in the most unlikely place, had built a life she was proud of, had become the person she was always meant to be. As the night deepened, and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, Natalie Stone held her husband's hand and felt grateful for every choice that had led her to this moment. The Wild West had been everything she hoped for and more. Harsh and beautiful, unforgiving and generous, a place where people could remake themselves if they had the courage to try. And she had tried. She had run toward the unknown, had trusted a stranger, had worked harder than she ever thought possible, and had found a love deeper than she knew existed. She had become stronger than she ever imagined, more capable, more herself. The children grew and thrived. Nathan eventually took over much of the ranch work, showing the same dedication and skill his father had. Andrew did travel, spending several years exploring the territories before eventually returning home and settling on a piece of land adjacent to theirs. Rose, defying all expectations, became one of the first women in Nevada to attend college, studying to become a teacher. Natalie and Nate grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. Their hair turned gray, their faces grew lined, but their hands still sought each other's in the darkness, and their hearts still beat in harmony. They lived to see grandchildren, 5 of them in total, running wild on the land they had claimed and tamed. They lived to celebrate 40 years of marriage, surrounded by family and friends who marveled at the journey they had taken together. They lived to see the turn of the century, watching as the Wild West they had known slowly transformed into something tamer, but still retaining echoes of its fierce independence. On their 50th wedding anniversary in 1932, when Natalie was 72 and Nate was 75, they stood together on the porch of their home and looked out over the land they had built their life on. Their children and grandchildren had gathered for a celebration, filling the house with laughter and love. 50 years, Natalie said wonderingly. Can you believe it? Feels like yesterday and forever ago all at once, Nate replied. His hand, still strong despite his age, held hers firmly. Best 50 years of my life. Mine too. Although I have to say the first few weeks were a bit uncertain, he laughed, the sound warm and familiar. "That's one way to put it. I proposed marriage to a woman I barely knew, and somehow she said yes." "You gave me an escape," Natalie said. "But more than that, you gave me a home. A real home, not just a place to live, but a place where I belonged." Their oldest grandson, Nathan Jr., came out onto the porch. He was 16 now, tall and strong like his grandfather and great-grandfather. "Grandma, Grandpa, everyone's waiting for you to cut the cake." "We're coming," Natalie said. But she paused for one more moment, looking at Nate with all the love of 5 decades shining in her eyes. "Thank you for that day in Winnemucca. Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me when I was lost and afraid. Thank you for offering me a choice when no one else would. Thank you for taking a chance on a rough cowboy with nothing but a dream," Nate replied. "You made me better than I ever could have been alone." They kissed, softly and sweetly, and then went inside to join their family. The house was full of people, full of love, full of the life they had built together from nothing but courage and determination, and a chance meeting on a dusty Nevada street. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Natalie stood at the window of their bedroom, looking out at the star-filled sky. Nate came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, and they stood together in comfortable silence. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't helped me that day?" Natalie asked. "Every so often. But then I remember that I don't care what might have been, because what we have is so much better than anything I could have imagined." "I think we were meant to find each other," Natalie said. "I think I was always supposed to run to Nevada and you were always supposed to be there waiting. Maybe so, or maybe we just got lucky." Nate kissed the top of her head. "Either way, I wouldn't change a single thing." Neither would Natalie. Her life had taken a turn she never could have predicted that day she fled Boston, but it had led her exactly where she needed to be. She had escaped an arranged marriage only to find herself in a real one, built on love and respect and genuine partnership. She had found herself in the Wild West, in the harsh beauty of the Nevada desert, in the strong arms of a ranch hand who had offered her a choice when no one else would. "Then arrange one with me," he had said, and she had said yes, and that single decision had changed everything. Years later, when Natalie was 82 and Nate had passed away peacefully in his sleep at 85, she stood at his grave and felt grateful for every moment they had shared. They had built something beautiful together. A ranch, a family, a love that had lasted through all the challenges life threw at them. She lived several more years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and even great-grandchildren, all of them thriving on the land she and Nate had claimed so many years ago. She told them stories about the Wild West as it used to be, about riding the stage into Winnemucca, about a young ranch hand who had changed her life with a simple proposal. When she finally passed away at 87, she was buried next to Nate on a hill overlooking their land. The headstone read, "Natalie Stone, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She chose her own path and found love along the way." The ranch continued on, passed down through the generations, and every stone who worked that land knew the story of how it all began, with a desperate woman fleeing an arranged marriage and a kind man who offered her a choice. They knew it was a story about courage and love, and the possibility of building something beautiful from nothing but determination and faith. And on summer evenings, when the work was done and the sun was setting over the distant mountains, the Stones would gather on the porch of the original house that Nate and Natalie had built with their own hands, and they would remember the two people who had started it all. They would remember the ranch hand and the runaway, and the love story that had bloomed in the harsh beauty of the Nevada desert. And they would know that some things, the best things, are worth fighting for,